I am, but in case you don't, my name's Stuart Waiton. I'm the chairperson of the Scottish Union for Education, which was set up at the start of this year because we had concerns about, as our strapline suggests, education becoming indoctrination. And one of the themes that we are concerned about is the transgender issue in schools, which is not necessarily what Rosie's going to talk about because her experience is different to that. But that's the framework, and we have just produced a little pamphlet, so I will advertise. There we go. Which is also available as an electronic one, or you can contact us and get bulk copies, which might sound like that's not going to happen, but I got a parent took 20 off me yesterday, who is going to hand them out to all the teachers in his school. So he's not going to be the most popular parent, I suspect, but you never know. One hopes that some of the teachers will also have concerns. This has been recorded just so that everybody knows. And I've been asked by the Free Speech Union just to note that they are also having an event about the arts and the problem with the issue that we're going to be looking at today in terms of the arts and the potential it has for limiting artistic freedom, which is in Edinburgh on the 19th of July. So if you're interested in that, check out the Free Speech Union and go and see that that's an in-person event. Okay, so just to give you the background of this, I watched Rosie on GB News being interviewed by Andrew Doyle. And what struck me as I thought, what a lovely woman this woman is. Not only that she was impressive, but she just seemed like a lovely person. And see, I almost expect to get cancelled all the time. And I would, even though it's not reasonable, I would kind of understand it because I'm kind of unpleasant, a bit aggressive, I'm a bit offensive. You know, it seems all right for people to come for me. But when I saw Rosie being interviewed, I thought, not only is this wrong, but it seems wrong because she seems like a really nice human being, and there's something seriously weird going on here. Having said that, and I want to get into this a little bit in the discussion about education, I suspect Rosie must have toughness to it, because I find it hard to imagine anyone being able to get to the top of your game without having a toughness. And it's an issue I want to kind of explore in terms of what young artists are today, which Rosie has experienced and I don't. So I'm interested in that side of things. So I'm going to ask Rosie a little bit about herself and her past. I'm going to jump into the trans issue, which I'll probably just explain a little bit about the background, because I suspect most people here might know Rosie's story, but I want to dig into that a little bit. And then I just want to have a bit of a chat about education in its broadest sense, and what Rosie's thoughts are about that, because that's really what we're trying to look at in the general theme of things, is the issue of education. Anyway, without any further ado, welcome Rosie. So I always kick off with this. I don't know why I have a fetish for people's childhood, but I suppose I'm just interested in people's backgrounds, what they were like. So what were you like as a kid? What was your school life like? And was there anybody that inspired you as a child?
So I moved around quite a lot as a kid because of my dad's job. So I was born in the Borders near Churnside. And then at the age of 3, we moved to the Maidenhead, the home counties. And so that was quite a profound difference between a Borders village and then, you know, a town on the Thames. And then we moved to Devon. So I'd already gone through like 3 schools by the time I was 6 or 7. And Devon I really loved. It was just very, very beautiful, rural. I think I started dancing at around 3 when we moved to Maidenhead, and I was a very, very quiet little girl, very quiet. My family were all book readers, but they sort of say that I didn't read. I didn't speak that much either, but I danced a lot. And then when we got to Devon, I was looking for a dance school. And really, I was, even at the age of 6 or 7, I was quite choosy about my teachers. I've no idea where that came from, but I could kind of tell what was proper dance and what was people putting on leotards and pretending to dance. Like, I could see that straight away. I remember going, there was this really posh little ballet school, and I just said, no, they're not doing proper dance, mum. And she was like, oh, all right, okay, whatever. So I went to a church hall. It was quite cheap, very cheap for a class, but the teacher was fantastic. June Billy, I think she still teaches. And I got into that groove where by the age of 9 or 10, I was taking 3 buses across Devon on my own to get to class in Exeter at least 3 times a week, and then all day Saturday. I just loved it, just absolutely loved it. I just got it, I understood it, it was difficult. It was just my place. So we moved to Scotland, back to Scotland when I was just turning into a teenager. And I got quite badly bullied. I went to Royal High School in Edinburgh, and I liked Royal High because it had a really good art department. And I think at that point I wanted to be an artist, like a painter. And I found it, again, I think I turned to dance, and it was a bit old-fashioned, the teaching in Edinburgh. It was all a bit, it was like going and just doing your exams. But I found it again, my sort of solace. And then I just got through that really tricky phase around 15, 16, when everyone else gives up. I just didn't. I got, again, really into it. And I would do ballet most nights, but then I'd also do lots of jazz. And just lucky enough to live in Edinburgh during that Brian McMaster's time, that I was seeing amazing, the best contemporary dance in the world. Who knew it was such a golden era? But Pina Bausch, the only place she would come in the UK was Edinburgh. So I saw her as a teenager in a half-empty playhouse where the other half of the audience walked out. It was all very radical stuff, but there was Pina Bausch, Mathieu Monnier, incredible. I mean, I remember Castellucci, but that might have been a little bit later. Just incredible dance that I was exposed to without even really knowing what it was, actually. And I went to an audition with a friend for a musical theatre school, and I got in, and I don't know what I was going to do, maybe art school or something. And I suddenly went, maybe I actually could do this dancing thing. And that's when I discovered contemporary dance. And what I liked about contemporary dance was it had the technique and the discipline, like very proper, with people like Graham and Merce Cunningham, but it also had the kind of the theatre, the acting, the theatrics, the arts, the visual arts, the music. You could choose anything, you could choreograph your own world. But it really appealed to me because I was very interested in history and the history of art and politics, and I was particularly inspired by the time between the wars in Germany, the Weimar Republic. I had a very enthusiastic history teacher, actually, Mr. Philip Mackenzie, who I still see quite regularly. And my dissertation at school was on Weimar art. And so I like this whole idea of the Weimar choreographers, Mary Wigman and Gret Paluca, and the crazy ones like Anita Berber. And so I kind of thought, contemporary dance, this kind of combines everything. And it looked so impossible and difficult. And that's why I auditioned for London Contemporary Dance School, and that's where I went. So that's how I got into dance.
Right, great. I'll come back to some of the themes on that, but I'm now going to just jump into, as you do, into the trans issue that you got stuck in. And rather than ask you to explain it, I'm just going to give a summary and then dig down a bit, and if there's anything you want to fill in. So essentially, my understanding of it from your previous interviews is that you essentially had your own company. You were thinking about doing it in Orlando. You had a discussion about this at a party in your own house that you've invited people to, which is nice.
Yeah.
And then this pushed towards a discussion about the trans question, and you were raising some thoughts about this in terms of women's rights and that there are some issues here. Now, the thing that I'm interested in is the nature of the people, right? Because it's one of the things that's worried me. It's worried me for about 20 years now, possibly. Yeah, it's probably been about that long. But I mean, when I grew up, and I don't think it's because of my background particularly, that was a kind of, you know, a laborist working class kind of town or anything like that. I just think the idea that you would think it's reasonable to complain about people and get them sacked was something that was just not on people's register. I don't think, right? That was kind of, if someone did that, you were a real scumbag, right? And this seems kind of normal now, right? Or, to some extent. And so I'm kind of interested to know what, without necessarily slagging off particular individuals or anything like that, is how did you experience these young people who you were training, you had a relationship with, you'd invited them into your house, and the fact you just raised this point that they don't like, there's this kind of bizarre onslaught. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on what, because my obsession is I think we live in this kind of narcissistic world, and there's something happens where people just don't seem to have a basic level of connection and decency with one another. But anyway, I'm just interested in what you think about those young people, relatively young adults, and what they did.
I suppose for me, I mean, I've had to kind of rationalize it quite a lot, and the seeds of the doom that happened to me were sown years prior, in that the company was my name and it was all my work, and I was renowned for making very specific, quite theatrical political works, including, you know, work about the military, a work about religion, and a work about conspiracy theory. And I was very particularly interested in belief systems and cults. And I was very experienced in working with experts in cults, military, religions, espionage. You know, I was really deep in this world, and I was very used to actually giving my own opinion. In fact, I felt that that was part of my job, was to go away, really think about things, and come back and ask questions. I was a year as the anthropologist, Liva Humatus at the School of Anthropology in Oxford. So it wasn't even a kind of untrained opinion. It was a very considered, research-based, peer-reviewed, if you like, you know, in the good old days when that meant something, opinion. And so each of my works have taken sometimes 5 to 10 years to come to the stage of thinking and investigating and researching. So the stuff around transgenderism, I'd seen for quite a long time coming, and I'd become more and more alarmed. And then I'd started to get the kind of like, if I liked anything by a feminist on Twitter, the arts world would be going for me. And I started to realize that there was this kind of shark swimming around. And when J.K. Rowling wrote her essay, I retweeted it under my own personal Twitter. I made a cup of tea, I came back within 2 minutes, and there were 20 other arts organizations saying, is this the official sort of policy of Rosie Kay Dance Company? And I deleted it. I was just terrified, but it really annoyed me. It really annoyed me. And I was, you know, feeling through COVID, something very strange is happening. I don't like this. Anyway, I auditioned through COVID. We made the work through COVID. It was horrific, the conditions. We were making a Romeo and Juliet. No one could eat together. Somebody was videoing us and phoning me and saying, I've just seen 2 dancers standing too close together. You know, like we were being surveilled while we were trying to make an artistic work. And I felt angry about that. I felt angry about wearing masks all the time. I wasn't convinced by the signs, but I wanted to offer work to people, and I wanted to come out of COVID with some good work to show. And I honestly felt really sorry for young people. There were dancers in that company that had never had a graduation show. I did think they were odd. the vibe was odd. I now realise now I was being policed. I hadn't quite, I think like somebody in my team had said, you do realise these two people are non-binary. And there were only like 3 white dancers in a cast of Asian and black dancers. And they were 2 of the white cast members, and they were both conservatoire trained. And I was sort of a bit like, well, you know, crack on. I'm non-binary to a certain degree. You know, everyone's non-binary. You know, I don't subscribe to any sex stereotypes. I think the non-binary thing threw me. I think if somebody had said they were trans, I'd be like, okay, right, let's talk about this. Let's talk about changing rooms and toilets and COVID and everything. Let's make it all part of something. But I think the non-binary thing, I was like, well, it's a bit like fashion, isn't it? I mean, you know, we grew up in the 80s and the 90s. It's androgyny. Of course, it's not. It's something actually that's really quite dangerous because it's undefinable. So I invited them to the party actually because I was worried about them and the vibe, and we were coming up to the premiere, and I knew that I was going to have to really push them hard. And I'd been really, really nice, and it wasn't really working. I'd been tough, and that wasn't really working. And I was just really anxious because they were on a very, very big stage, and they weren't experienced enough, and they weren't really listening. And I was trying all my different techniques to cajole and get them up, and it wasn't always working. It was sort of very up and down all the time. There was no consistency. And I thought, well, that's the kind of thing that really fails on the large scale, on the big stage. If you drop it and it's weak, it's a terrible show. They need to be absolutely on it. So I invite them to my house just to make them feel loved, make them feel looked after, have a little bit, you know, I have a young son, play in the garden, you know, just feel part of a family. It is genuinely the way I've done my companies. I kind of feel like you're part of a team. Yeah, I mean, the night itself, I don't really go into much detail about, because it actually was like, I was sort of slightly still in trauma about it. I told them things, you know, I said all the things that are now absolutely out there and apparent around the sterilisation of children, around the very extremes of women, men being placed in women's prisons, of women in hospitals, of the definitions of rape, what it means to women's sports, you know, all the things that are now like really clear. I was already very, very well versed in and had the evidence for, but they got really angry with me. And then I ended up like, you know, telling stories about my own experiences of nearly dying in childbirth, you know, to try and say that's an experience that actually only a female-bodied person could go through, and it affects you and your child forever. So I really appealed, you know, and exposed myself, and yet I knew afterwards I'd definitely not won anyone. I'd probably lost not everybody, but for some reason they were waiting to take offence. Now that the problem was that I didn't have a very good or secure board and management around me. Had they just gone, right, but the thing is, Rosie, you're allowed to have your opinion and we've got your back. I mean, I've just had to read some data subject access request stuff. So I've tried to just read some stuff. The dancers were kind of saying these things, but also saying, we want to make it completely clear we love working with Rosie and we want to continue working with Rosie. So they were acting in a very immature way, but they were being really, the flames were being really fanned, and to an illegal point were being fanned in some sort of strange reputational risk crisis that the board had decided to get themselves into. The reputational risk to the company, which had my name in it, was of more importance than me as a person, as an artist, even the show, actually. So, and the problem was, I saw this absolutely crystal clear. You know, it's one of those, you know, make or break moments, and you go, shit, this is a real nightmare, can you help me? And your team, not the dancers, because they're freelance and they come and they go, but your team just turn, and it, like Stepford Wives, their eyes changed, their demeanor changed, and I just thought, oh, this is horrific. These people don't know what's going on here. You know, I tried to explain, I stayed very calm, and never got angry about it, but I could just see that they didn't know what was going on, and they got into a complete virtue signaling echo chamber together. And for that, I'm far more angry with the board, who are grown-ups.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, actually. I mean, because I think both things are true. I think, well, from my experience anyway, I find and this, I'm expecting this to increase, but we'll wait and see. But I think young people are going to be at my university. I'm expecting that there'll be a kind of a growing number of complaints. That's what I'm expecting. Right? And I agree with you, because my experience is exactly the same, which is, if university management have got any balls and principles, it doesn't matter. Right? So it doesn't matter that you've got the little LGBT youth sort of activists organizing to throw things in your direction. As long as you've got a principled management framework, which, and that's interesting. I mean, do you have an explanation for that in terms, because obviously these are people you knew, and I presume you were kind of friends, colleagues with your board?
Yeah.
Do you have how do you interpret that in terms of how this, or why this happens? Are they just worried about the external view of the company, or is it more than that they actually, because it's like a new morality, isn't it, the trans thing? You know, it's like equality, diversity, inclusion. It is like a new morality, as far as I can see, and that's where I think it becomes really dangerous, that people have a sense that this is moral goodness, and therefore treating a decent human being like garbage seems entirely reasonable suddenly, even though everyone from the outside is looking in thinking, Jesus, this is horrendous.
Yeah, and you know, had it not happened to me, I wouldn't believe it was possible. And then, of course, since it's happened to me and I've gone public, I mean, I'm getting phone calls from one person a week in that this is happening to them. This is still going on. It's going on across the arts, all sectors of the arts. Some sectors are more brutal than others. Music's terrible. Visual arts is horrific. And if anybody dare even like something, never mind say anything, that's it. They will go for you. You will be shut down. You will be hounded, and you will be out of a job. It's absolutely remarkable. No, I mean, I really sort of kind of was like, a bit of me just going like, there had been this sort of gap between, because the media had not been reporting this, and I think this has really dramatically changed in the past couple of years. The media were not reporting this. So people that were really speaking out about this were only feminists and women. And it seemed to be really easily debunked, like immediately, just shut down. It's as if like lifelong, really serious artists and women had just become bigots overnight. It was like, why has nobody asked themselves what's going on here? Maybe you should listen to us for a moment. But it did really seem like this immediate, as if you've just said the worst thing in the world. So I kept trying to like just calmly explain, send links. I think the Nolan Stonewall podcast series came out during my investigations, and saying, you know, like, I think you guys need to educate yourselves on what's going on. And there was just this utter resistance to this. I still don't get it. You're right, these people were my friends, some of them were at my wedding, at the christening of my child. I still, it's the one thing that can sort of still bring the anger up in me, and then I just have to let it go. It was the wrong team. They were the wrong people. They had entirely missed what my purpose was. I can't believe they sat through all these bloody shows and didn't realise what a rebellious voice I had, or an individual voice. I don't go with the crowd, and a lot of my work is about not going with the crowd, and about what happens if people speak out and get bullied or ostracized. This was in there within Five Soldiers. It's in there within There Is Hope. It was in there in Romeo and Juliet. What do you do if you don't want to be part of the gang? Because you know that the gang are oppressive bullies. So it was almost like Romeo and Juliet just turned into, it's like, let's all point at her. And it was a witch hunt. It was just unbelievable.
I mean, it constantly surprises me that. So I watched Trumbo, you know, the film about Dalton Trumbo. I don't know if you haven't seen it. Well, there you go. That'll be something you gain from this evening, because it's a great film. So go and watch Trumbo. It's that guy that is in Breaking Bad, and he's a guy that was a screenwriter who was blacklisted, right, the McCarthy era and all the rest of it. And I can be absolutely sure that all these young people and your colleagues and all the rest of it will watch something like Trumbo and go, oh yeah, and they'll be sitting on the side of the angels denouncing McCarthy. Oh, they're terrible. They were terrible days. People being hounded out of their jobs, being blacklisted, being this, being that, and all the rest of it. They will absolutely watch that film and feel like they're on the side of Dalton Trumbo. I'm convinced about it. And yet they are doing exactly the same thing. And that's what you think. How does the mindset work on that? That they'll watch the this Salem witch hunts, and they'll see that's terrible. All these witch hunts from the past, they'll all be on the right side, and yet they don't seem to be able to look at themselves and say, look, we've just forced somebody, potentially ruined their lives because they have an opinion that differs to us. And
well, that's what you got to stand up against it, really. I mean, they are the righteous zealots, and I think, that's the thing about, you've got to have an element of doubt and cultivate doubt in your own opinions and doubt in yourself. And if, the evidence completely changed tomorrow, I would absolutely consider it. But as far as I can see it, the evidence supports my beliefs. But, yeah, I mean, talking about this generational gap, it is strange. It's like everything has been through a sort of dialectic system of oppression, and that's not the way one can work in the arts. And I think that's why this whole movement, trans being part of it, but actually it's wider than that, because it's any sort of like any of the kind of, whether it be racism or other sort of constructs, because it puts anybody who's in any sort of position of power as the master and the oppressed. And so the true nature of collaboration, or even performance, or in my profession, technique, is seen as oppressive. Right. Being a director and asking people what to do, by your very job as the choreographer, you are the oppressor. And I don't work like that, and I've never worked like that. I work very collaboratively, but there's a certain point where we've got to get the job done, and there's a show going on stage, and there's an audience over there, and it's about the audience judging us, not us judging. I'm just really used to people coming in, not performing, that like knowing who they are, and then working really hard, both with their bodies, but also their minds, their imaginations, to become a character or to execute a role very, very, exquisitely as best as they can. And so you ask for this kind of like starting point that we're all individuals. We come into the room, we bring everything we've got, and then we mess it all up, and we try and find the bits that make this story the best. But if you're coming in already performing, then the whole atmosphere is destroyed. And if I'm in a role where I'm trying to get something done, but I can't ask for it, I can't say it without it being oppressive, I can't do my job. And so there's something, and that's happening across all the arts now. So it's got this, and of course, like putting nuanced and difficult subject matters on stage with somebody may behave in a racist way or a sexist way. Well, me as an artist, I'm doing that in order to show that character, and that character might say something horrible one minute or do something horrible one minute, but might do something really amazing the next minute. And these complicated human nuances, that you can't read it like that. They can't read it like that. They read it as like, oh, this was the author Rosie Kay being racist or sexist or transphobic, as opposed to like, well, actually, this is actually the safe place to explore the depths and heights of humanity. So something like so deeply soul destroying about this way of behaving and approaching and looking at the world. There's nothing to be learned, is there?
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. I mean, I watch an inordinate amount of television, right? So as soon as this is over, the bottle of wine will be open. I'll be on Netflix. I'll be searching because I can get everything. And I'll be searching for best latest thing on Apple, best latest thing on Disney, blah, 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 and all the rest of it. And it's kind of noticeable to a certain extent, not absolutely, but to a certain extent, noticeable to me that you can almost see around about sort of 2010, maybe it's a little bit later than that, that you feel as if programs before that, there was a certain freedom, right? And I now weirdly, which I never did at the time, I now look back at the 1990s as this decade of freedom, right? Which I didn't at the time because I was left wing and it was the end of left wingness. So I was probably a bit miserable at that. But now that I look back, and even up the first decade, potentially of the millennium, you can see that program makers didn't feel the need to have a certain number of black faces, certain number of this, and then as soon as you have that, I think you've got a kind of a corset on your creative ability, because it's very rare. In fact, one of the few films recently, was the Three Billboards film, which I don't know if you've seen the Three Billboards film, but Three Billboards film where you've got a racist cop who in the end's kind of heroic, right? And it's and you think, well, that's great, but I know the guy. Well, I don't know him personally, but I know who the guy is, and he's a London Irish guy. The guys that made In Bruges and these other films that are not very politically correct, and they're just creating great characters, and they have a grounding in an idea of a sense of community and the nuances of people, and they don't get bogged down in this kind of framework. Whereas now, increasingly, you just think, God, I wonder if they're going to make some really, really good stuff now, because it's so limiting. I mean, it's so limiting that they feel the need to have some kind of moral kind of cloud around the whole thing. Right. And I mean, and I'm not in the arts at all, right?
Yeah, I completely
in the arts, this must be that must be horrendous.
I completely agree. I mean, I think me and my husband picked up on it a few years ago. I mean, he's a film fanatic, so we've got thousands of DVDs downstairs, and so there was a point, I couldn't watch anything after 2005 actually, and then we got into the whole 90s, and then I got really into 70s films. Like 70s is the last time where there really were it's such a golden age of like dark experimentation. But you're right, in terms of like what's being produced at the moment, it's got to have some kind of like moral message that's been approved by the groupthink. You've got new guidelines coming in England and the Arts Council that on the risk register, that if the artist is making work that could be deemed controversial, this could be a risk not just to your board that needs to get involved, but also it could have your funding halted. So there's going to be even more risk-averse work going out. Everyone's terrified. Even like some really big directors are getting holed up and told off if they use the wrong pronouns. And then have to apologize in front of their whole cast. The whole sort of like powers, like that whole magic you have to hold in your hand is being, frayed away. I mean, but what you say is audiences. The bit that's missed out of this is like audiences, and I think audiences really, 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 really aren't stupid at all, and don't like it and can see through it, and I've never wanted to be lectured at. So I just kind of have hope, because while arts can be the most vulnerable to this, because I mean, you're in and you're out, whether your face fits anyway, never mind if you've been blacklisted, you could just be like out of fashion. So suddenly you're out of fashion. And that's that. It's awful, but it's true. I think there's a possibility that there could be a really vibrant movement that comes out of this, as long as this doesn't really crack down and really shut down freedoms, because that's the worry. If this is bigger than just a cultural thing, if this really is a big political move, then we're in trouble. But if I have hope for Turf Island, that we are well organised. We're I can't even say it. Well, I was going to say articulate, but I can't even say it. Well-versed, articulate, political, lobbying, joining together, and just brave. We're not, this is not acceptable. And more and more people, it's been on a few of our shoulders for a bit too long. Whether you look at Kathleen Stock in academia, or Sharon Davis in sports, or myself in the arts, it's been on too few shoulders for too long. I kind of thought by the middle of last year there'd be like loads of people speaking out. That hasn't happened, but behind the scenes it is. But I'm like getting a bit like tired now. Can people speak out, please? Because we have to do it collectively.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I mean, that is why, to give ourselves a plug, we set up this thing as a union. I think we need new institutions. I think the unions have been captured by all of this stuff. And it's like the Free Speech Union. We need new institutions that don't go along with this and are prepared to challenge it. So hopefully that's what we can do. Right, I'm going to ask one more question. So if people want to put their little yellow hands up, I'm sure everyone knows how to do this now. I think you go to reactions, don't you? You can, yes, and you can do a little raise your hand. So raise your hands if you want to ask Rosie a question. But I'm just going to, last question, which relates to what you said, which I think is really interesting about power or authority. Because there's one of the books by Frank Furedi is called Authority, and he's looked at what authority has meant over the last 2,000 years. And he makes the observation that authority has increasingly been collapsed with authoritarianism. And the very idea of authority, especially since the 60s, but it was developing well before that, has become problematized, seen as really problematic. And my interest in this, in terms of education and in relation to what you do, is my understanding of someone getting to where you are, or the people you work with who must be really, really good, is that you need to be self-disciplined.
Yeah.
And you also need discipline, right? Because especially as a kid, right? And this is, and I'll say especially blokes or lads, and especially working class lads, need discipline, right? Especially at school. And this is very crude, but it's true that if I went to school, if my mother was ever going to say, did you have a good day? I would probably say yes, if I had had a good laugh with my mates, right? That was a good day at school, right? And if I learned anything, it would have been because the teacher would have tried to stop me having a laugh with my mates, right? Now, that's very crude, but I do think this idea of discipline and self-discipline is absolutely essential for achievement, right? Achievement, and especially at the levels of excellence. So I'm kind of interested in the young adults you work with and how that works, because you've got this kind of idea of snowflakes and so on, but obviously these people must be self-disciplined and they must be prepared to accept discipline, I assume. But on the other hand, you get this kind of sense that there's a real kind of fragility to them. And so I'm not, and you know, that you're an authority figure, therefore, you know, so I'm kind of interested in how you think about that in terms of the people you've worked with, and if this is an issue or a problem.
Well, I think, first of all, to say that possibly some of the pedagogic technique that I experienced both as a child and as a student probably erred too far on the side of authoritarian and strict and cruel. And I'd also admit that within the arts, there certainly were some abuses of power. And so I was very much of the school of holding on to the good bits of that discipline and that tradition and that technique, which is very pedagogic. It's sort of teacher to dancer or choreographer to dancer, and get rid of some of the nastier sides, the bullying, the psychological bullying, the sexual harassment kind of elements, or the way that women particularly were treated in say, larger companies. You know, I sort of had seen and witnessed and experienced a lot of this as a young dancer and as a young choreographer, actually. And so kind of felt that I kind of wanted to model a sort of a medium between, you know, not so relaxed that there was no discipline, but certainly an excellence, a self-motivated discipline. And I've worked in dance education also for 20, 25 years and set up sort of training programs, and was always kind of really enjoyed seeing young people thrive under, these are the rules, this is the bit that's strict, this is the bit over here that's very creative. And I think all of that now is blurring in terms of what I understand is happening in dance conservatoires. I think I've just worked with a new company, we auditioned, I found them like incredibly self-motivated and disciplined and committed. And I set up something called the Charter of Creation, which basically just says that, you know, the studio is somewhere where we're able to talk and discuss any subject matter and no one's going to get cancelled. And the art is the place to look at the height and depth of humanity. And so I think that there were dancers, or there were people coming out in the past few sort of like years, maybe had a physical training, but hadn't been given a decent art history or a decent dance history, and didn't have a decent sort of philosophical grasp of the meaning of art. And I really do hope that, you know, the next generation is hungry for that. I don't think we've had to articulate just how important the arts are to a healthy society. Now, I've worked with, I think I said earlier, the military and people that work in like secret services. And in a talk I gave a couple of years ago, just before I was cancelled, speaking to somebody that works in secret services, and I said, why is it that artists get targeted? And he said, well, you're the most difficult lot. You're asking questions. You're often very free-minded and you're challenging. They said that we use it as a way to see when authoritarianism is coming through different regimes. Like artists, first of all, start to get sort of cancelled. Their work gets not shown anymore. Then they start to get harassed. Then they might start to get investigated, which could go into like police investigation. So we're just around that mark now. Then they start to get kind of taken into cells, tortured, where this is going, you know, and he said, this is one of the hallmarks we study, there'll be activists and protesters, but we actually look at artistic communities and see what's going on there. And that gives us a really good indication of basically how healthy and how safe a society is. He said, we're used to looking at that in the places you might think, like Belarus or Egypt or whatever. We're just not used to looking at this in Western democratic societies. He said, that's a turnaround.
That's very interesting and slightly worrying. So if there's anyone listening out there, I'm with the trans from now on. It's Rosie. Rosie, you won.
Yeah, they came for Rosie. We ran away.
Right, great. Thank you for that. Okay, we've got 3 hands up. Oh, 4 hands up. So I'll take a couple. I will take, let's have Katie. As she's a resident dance. So I think I have just.
Right. Okay.
Oh.
All right, there I am. I did it right this time. Okay. So I'm really, as somebody who works within the sector, I'm interested when you're talking about a vibrant movement coming out of this. Certainly, for me, working in dance in Scotland, I sometimes feel like the lone voice, turfy voice on Turf Island, who is kind of putting my head above the parapet. And I know, like, I've been on Turf Blocker, I know I've been canceled for a long time, and that's kind of okay because I work on the fringes anyway. But I don't really see any, I don't know, do you think, like, I think people really believe it? Do you think, like, I find like a lot of my dance colleagues and people in the arts, like there is very little voice coming out of. Where did Rosie go? Did she go?
Oh, there she is. It's all right. She's still there.
She's like, do you find because you are obviously in a bigger scale than me, do you find people who do work within the arts, well, in England at least, who are in performing arts? Because I know people in, like you said, I know visual artists and I know writers, and I know comedians who definitely have come out, but in the performing arts, like, I know it's like tumbleweed. Like, I don't know anybody who is not signing up for this activism in the arts, this morality in the arts. They're all doing it. It's everywhere.
Yeah, they've really not gone public. So someone's had to leave the country. Someone who is mixed race, was accused of racism and has left. So it's a second choreographer, has left the country. Someone else has been completely cancelled. I know quite a lot of choreographers have been under investigations. There's about 3 or 4 other choreographers that have been under long investigations after accusations. So I sort of do like a little support system going on, but they're not ready because it's happening. It's very traumatic. Not everybody's willing to go public at all. They just disappear. And out of COVID, that's sort of like happened, and people haven't really noticed who's not there. So a lot of people who should be there that aren't there.
Yeah.
I wonder out of that how we start these new organizations, like how this is something I think about all the time. Like how is it we initiate like an island, I guess, an island within Turf Island specifically for arts? Say, come over here, you don't have to worry, right? Like, I don't know what the answer. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Like, that's something I think about.
Don't answer that yet, because I'll bring it. Alex, you can. What's your question? I'll get a few in. No, you're muted. Oh, all right. It doesn't say you're muted, but we're not hearing anything.
Can you hear me?
Oh, that's it.
Praise the Lord. Rosie, this really shouldn't be your story, and it's not. You know, you've got a body of work all the way up until this moment, and by all accounts, you'll have a great body of work after it. But seeing as we're here, I'm glad you mentioned Pina Bausch. I think I saw her, or at least her company, in the Playhouse in Edinburgh in the 80s, mid-80s or something like that. I was trying to show off, undoubtedly, in front of a girl. But anyway, it set me off on an interest in contemporary dance. And again, went through to the Playhouse to see, how do you say it, Québécois, French-Canadian dance company called La 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 Human Step.
Yeah.
And when I went to see that, they were an extremely physical, acrobatic, and I think androgynous company. And what kind of put you on your back foot was you didn't know whether these were guys or women doing this acrobatic stuff. And there was kind of some sensual dance as part of the movement. And a bunch of people, not that many, but enough to cause a ruckus, got up and left the theatre, which turned into a conversation in the media the next day around homosexuality. So we're still talking about early 90s here. But what was interesting was that conversation, or that reaction, was from what you might have called the kind of Mary Whitehouse brigade, you know, old fogies, religious zealots who were saying we shouldn't have to see this kind of stuff. Why they were there, we don't know. Nevertheless, that debate, that so-called contrarian conversation died down very quickly, because the dance company had no truck with it whatsoever, came out and said, this is what we do, we think it's important. And the theatre came out and says, this is the point, we want to challenge, we want great radical contemporary dance. So the kind of zealots were just destroyed fairly quickly. But the zealots were coming for the outside of the industry, whereas your story, the zealots are coming for the inside, both your students or you know, your dancers, but also your board, which is absolutely horrifying. And while I agree, or while I think that creativity will always out, You know, people will always respond to great creative work. Presumably, there's going to be less and less places to put that work on. So are we looking at smaller theatres? Are we looking at independent places rather than the big theatres like, you know, the Playhouse in Edinburgh and wherever else in England?
My English, anyone can tell you, is not great, but the one thing I always pick people up on, which is not to say it's not slightly annoying, is it's fewer and fewer, not less and less. Fewer. I could. Anyway, I'll bring Rona in, then Rosie, you can chip in your thoughts. Rona.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, okay. This is something that happened in my child's school, secondary school, that I'm sort of slightly sworn to secrecy because it was a teacher that told me, but I wonder, Rosie, what you think your thoughts are on this. So there was meant to be, one of the teachers had fancied doing a big production on J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. So this was Largs Academy down at Largs. So this production was meant to incorporate everything, music, dance, everything, food, the whole aspect of what Harry Potter was for the secondary school. And these productions in this school are normally fabulous. However, the head teacher decided to quietly say to the teacher, who I know very well and had told me this, that no, because it was going to offend the transgender sector, that no, they weren't doing that production. So what's made me so angry about this is that nobody seems to know that this was shut down and cancelled. So for the small minority of people, and that was never asked, so they never even monitored who was going to be offended by this, but the vast amount of parents who loved Harry Potter, reading it to their children, whose children's fantasy, creative expression of literature and everything that they learned from doing this, and being able to widen their sort of what's the word I'm looking for, artistry on writing, creative writing. And also in this production there was going to be dance and everything. So where do we go? Because I was told this in confidence, and I'm really, really angry as a parent that that was cancelled, because that would have been a fantastic production. How often is this going on within the schools? How often, where are the schools being taught at a greater level to shut down anything that's going to be? So what's your feelings on that, and where can we go with this?
Yeah, I'll bring Kate in as well, as that's, I think, probably all the questions. If anyone else has got any other questions, just stick your hand up and we'll bring you in after Rosie's come in. But I might as well plug the Witch Hunt of J.K. Rowling podcast, in case you haven't heard it. It's great. I'm only halfway through it, but it is fantastic.
Oh, great. Okay.
It's on Amazon. Very,
what's it called, Stuart?
The Witch Hunt of J.K. Rowling. Very, very intelligent and interesting podcast, which apparently Davina McCall tweeted and said, "Oh, this is quite balanced." And she got monstered for daring to say that this podcast was balanced, because it's a kind of free speech type podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kate.
Yeah, what I wanted to ask about, because I'm kind of, quite au fait with people being ostracized or cancelled or whatever, but I was really shocked, Rosie, by what you said about people learning their craft and actually finding it difficult to be, taught or challenged, with this sense that people who are instructing them are being authoritarian and controlling people as such. I'm just wondering what impact down the line, if we're talking 5 years or whatever down the line, what impact do you think that's going to have on the arts if people in training don't want to be properly trained in really strict disciplines, which, most art is, music is, proper dance, art. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, interesting. Right, Rosie, I'll hand it over to you, and then I'll get rid of this little crowd. And there's a few other questions to come. But any thoughts on anything that's been said so far?
So sort of try and tie it all together a little bit. I think like Alex is right about like kind of you know what is going on in theatres, you know, because I mean theatres are in a really difficult place anyway at the moment with cost of living crisis and audiences not returning and sort of struggling with anything that isn't musical theatre, isn't feel good right now, and that's across the board. I sit on the board of the Dance Consortium, so I look regularly at the biggest venues in the UK. And I think like what's interesting is you, of course, you won't hear about the silent cancellations, like you were saying about the School and Largs. You don't hear about everything that was meant to happen that didn't happen. And it happens in all sorts of subtle ways. It can be when your tickets go on sale, you suddenly get a Twitter pile-on. But I have to say it's mostly from inside the organisations, which is absolutely the other point. It's happening from inside. It's often happening from staff inside organisations. They've often got their own LGBTQ plus staff groups that are activist groups, and they just are absolutely, you know, a year and a half after this dinner party, they're still filled with such zealousy to get me cancelled, that venues are actually very shocked by this kind of violence from within, and if they're brave, they'll deal with it because they think that these people probably shouldn't be working in theatre. But it does make them then very worried of you as an artist. So you come along not just with a whole load of baggage, you come along with a target on your back. So I'm trying to sort of embody the fight back and the uncancelling of myself. But it's hard work. You know, it can be very painful and personally very threatening. And that horrible thing, like somehow you feel like you're to blame when I've done absolutely nothing wrong. And I know I've done nothing wrong, but there's that sense that you have, because everyone, you know, like in the 90s is sort of, oh, you're being the one that isn't open to it. It's like, if anyone's ever seen my work or even watched it online or in videos, and that MK Ultra, you know, I was making very androgynous, playing with sex stereotypes, playing with sex-based roles. But I don't think anyone was ever trying to deny the reality of sexed bodies. That's an entirely new thing. And going back to the very beginning of the conversation, what the dangers are of that and what the protections are there for people with sex as a protected characteristic. I think there are two. What's going to happen in the future is there is an erosion of standards going on. There is a very deliberate erosion of standards. It's very much, and you see it in the most sort of like elite of the elite. So in dance, ballet's been very good at hanging on to its traditions. There's a reason why it survived 400 years and revolutions. But it's also happening in classical music. And so it's just a real worry that there's not going to be the quality of sound or art that we have sort of like hope, you know, they're kind of like a crown jewels, and you know, those in themselves are sort of seen as right-wing art forms now, which I think it's really tragic. It's not political, it's about the quality of the art and making that argument. I think like freedom is a universal concept we can see through particularly Western history the past 2,000 years, whereas offence is something that very periodically changes and changes quite dramatically. And so I think I agree that we need to sort of fight for concepts that we can get behind rather than be defensive and fight against something, because you end up fighting hysteria with hysteria, and that doesn't work. So yes, I am absolutely, Katie, to go back to your very first point, Denise Farney, you may have heard of, just won a case this week. She took the Arts Council to court and she won on her count of harassment. Yeah, she's a very brave woman. She and I are at the beginning of setting up a organisation that's going to look at freedom of speech for artists, freedom of expression to protect the arts, and we're going to hold those institutions to account. We're going to go and say, what's your purpose? What are you here to do? How are you doing it? Are you sure you're doing it? What about that equality policy you've got, Arts Council? Are you going to actually look at your own policies? And then so through those three ideas, that will have trickle down across the art forms. So we're working on that. So please direct anyone, you know, towards me, and that will be launching. We're thinking about launching that later in the autumn.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'm just gonna, sorry for wiping you out. I feel like a cancel culture person now. Destroying each person. Right, gone. Right, now we've got two more. Jenny, if you want to unmute yourself, you should be able to make your point.
Yeah.
Ask your question.
There we go. Hi. Rosie, thank you very much. I mean, it's been fascinating following your story or your heartache, I imagine, but it clearly has actually strengthened you in many ways, because it's made you independent of that ghastly bunch of board members, and you kind of probably won't make that mistake again of getting people just because they're prepared to finance you. I'm just fascinated, right, that a group of artists who are going to embark on Orlando clearly have never read the novel. If they had, I mean, it just raises so many questions actually about this whole trans business anyway. But now, the question I was going to sort of raise was this one about cultural appropriation, because I mean, that's crept in as well, and it's kind of very much related to the, you know, this whole ideological onslaught, really, the effect of which is to actually homogenize groups and say that no group can actually speak for another. And I mean, that just seems to me to be death to art, death to writers, to interpreters, to choreographers. And I just wondered what you thought about that and how one can begin to challenge that in the arts.
Right, thanks, Jenny. Simon.
Yeah, there's been a bit of a chat in the online Zoom chat there about what is motivating young people, young adults, to develop these reactions. And it's not just around the trans culture. I mean, I've got a friend who's quite a famous playwright, actor. His wife too is also involved in the arts. She's a movement choreographer or something like that. And you know, they had the audacity to vote against Scottish independence at the independence referendum. And there's people that have never spoken to them again since then. And it's the same with the European thing as well, in terms of Brexit. So it's not just a trans thing, although I think identity is very, very tightly tied up with that. There's a number of, it's a multifaceted problem that we're facing. And it's really ironic that the young adult generation that we're now kind of dealing with and experiencing is maybe the Harry Potter generation, the ones that have grown up reading these books. It's bloody ironic, isn't it? But what really got me first interested in all this was looking at the idea of risk and how risk impacted on childhood. And the response to risk was this kind of all-encompassing safety culture, where children were just seen as vulnerable in every kind of institution or any institution that they experienced. And schools started kind of trying to really clamp down and deal with bullying as a perceived form of risk, and just constantly supervise children. So children at school during these years, 20, 25 years ago, were constantly supervised. They never experienced any time where they weren't supervised. And consequently, they never ever had to resolve difficulties themselves. They always had an umpire or a referee to sort out their problems for them. So we've now got these children as young adults, and some of them aren't so young. I'm working with primary school teachers, and they're part of this generation too. And so they're now in a world where they're having, as grown-ups, as you might anticipate them to be, should be independent, should be morally independent and able to resolve problems for themselves, but they can't. So they get extremely outraged if you disagree with them, because they've never ever had somebody disagreeing with them in a way that they have to then kind of fight their corner and have a reasonable discussion. And I don't know how much of that you saw in terms of your experience, Rosie, and or whether you, because you've worked with a lot of young adults, whether they did come to you more and more frequently with tittle tattle about so-and-so's looking at me so funny, and somebody's talked about me, and oh, this isn't fair. And you having to be cast as the person who resolves difficulties that in the past we would have all just had to resolve ourselves and work out ways of doing.
Yeah, this is, I thought Simon might get excited when he heard you took 3 buses. Simon did his PhD looking at old people and how they used to travel, and he's got all these stories of 12-year-olds who cycle across Scotland, swim to Ireland, all in one day, come back and they've still got a sandwich left. It's that kind of stuff, right? So I thought you might get excited about that.
Nuanced as ever.
But I do want to see, this was my kind of slightly crude question about discipline and that kind of approach, because I do feel as if, see, if kids are brought up in a certain environment, you become strong, right? And so when someone is a bit in your face, you don't feel like you're being bullied. You just feel like, oh, he's a bit of a dick, but you can deal with it. And that's my kind of concern, is that I wonder if there's a generation of young people who genuinely can't deal with things. And I'm not entirely sure if that's true, because life is still difficult. It's difficult for everybody. Every generation is difficult. But that kind of like basic backbone, which comes at least in part from having had authoritative people that you've had to deal with. So that's kind of remains a
to be St. George, you actually do need to kill a dragon.
Yeah. Penny, and then I'll bring Rosie in, and I think that will be us summing up, and Rosie will be able to open her bottle of wine.
Or Rosie.
Yeah, Penny.
When you were talking, Rosie, I was thinking about my daughter, and when she was about 13, I took her to go to Richard DeMarco's archive. I don't know whether you know Richard DeMarco, in Edinburgh. And we were kind of like, it was a kind of horrible day. We were a bit down in the dumps. And Richard came out and started talking to her. And that's his thing, isn't it? He does a lot of these projects with young people. And he sort of said, oh, everyone can be an artist. And he pursued this theme. And I was kind of thinking, I wanted to say, well, I don't actually agree with you, Richard. But part of me kind of was pleased he said it, and made me think, God, that's really generous. And yes, we should be encouraging this in young people. And I kind of always, because I teach in an art school, I always have this problem of like, we can all do it. No, we can't do it. I kind of feel like there needs to be a distinction. And I'm interested in what you think about that, particularly coming from the performing arts, because somebody sent us an email the other day about lesbian and gay group that goes into schools, had given LGBT charter to the first primary school in Scotland, in Dundee, Downfield, which is, not a particularly wealthy area. It's become the first lesbian and gay charter school. And obviously I'm worried about them talking, because they're not a very trustworthy organization, talking to primary schools. But the thing that really upset me was they said, to celebrate this, the whole school sang this song called This Is Me. And I kind of thought, I'm worried about them sexualizing young children, but I'm more worried about the fact that we're obsessed with the idea of telling children that they've got to perform to be themselves. They can't just develop their character. There's this constant pushing of this idea that they've got to construct themselves, they've got to say who they are, they've got to define their identity. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, whether we need to start telling kids that they don't have to be performing or constructing an identity, and whether it's important that we make a distinction between creativity, which, okay, we can, and real creativity, creativity that is real achievement rather than just personal expression. It seems we've gone too far down the personal expression line with quite young children.
Great. Okay. Right. I'm now going to unspotlight. I'm going to cancel you lot, and I'm just going to let Rosie kind of sum up with any thoughts you have
from those questions. So there's a really interesting point about the cultural appropriation, because you're right, that kind of came along first actually in the arts as the kind of like pre-cancellation criticism mechanization. And I'm really now at the point where it's absolutely wrong. It's wrong as a concept. It's absolutely stupid. It's insane. But I certainly felt it at the time. And I remember sort of like just saying, well, there's a massive difference between sort of plagiarism and, you know, kind of homage. And, you know, and I wouldn't dare to like just steal somebody's work and shove it on stage. And of course, any decent artist would never ever do that, and would always credit if they were taking it either from another artist or from a different culture or from a different time even, actually. And I think, like, I mean, I've been so lucky to work in dance before all this, because it's a massive global universal art form, and so I'd go anywhere in the world, not say a word, and work and get on with people and form, like, you know, really profound bonds. But do you know what, you know, it goes back to what we were saying before. I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have some decent technique to hang everything on, you know, of knowing yourself, of knowing your coordination, of learning some basics, to have the confidence to then try out other things. Yes, there's some natural ability there, but you also need that technique to kind of hang your worries and everything else that's going on to do that. I think that thing about like the children being vulnerable, I mean, what I think, this is my sort of little theory, is that I think we've kind of created a little bit of a Lord of the Flies generation. And I see it, that this is the first generation that was seen as very vulnerable and weren't allowed out and didn't play in the street quite as much as I did, or outside, or just disappear. They were seen as at home, but they were on devices. And so you knew physically where your child was, but actually you had no idea where they were and where they were going. And they were forming, first of all, groups, and then they were forming online bullying groups, and then they were getting groomed. And so they've come out of that with, I think, what I noticed, first of all, with young people was much less personal skills, much less social skills, just eye contact, ability to chat, like make small talk and chat. And I could see that they were all talking and communicating with each other on their phones, not with each other in real time. So something really weird about interpersonal and physical skills that then make, say, for example, in dance, touching each other feels incredibly invasive. I'm used to safeguarding training and explaining touch. I've never had to explain touch or lifts to adults, and I do, like adult professional dancers, and I do now. I do, not for my safety in case they, well, it actually is for my safety in case they accuse me of anything, but it's also because they don't have those skills. They can go through 3 years of dance training without doing partner work. It's absolutely extraordinary. I don't think that's worth the money, actually. And then that sort of online, like Lord of the Flies type young people, that then links to that identity question that you were talking about with Richard DeMarco's Everybody an Artist. There's a very, very narcissistic quality to some of this, when I really do hope we're moving out of this, because I do think it's getting boring, where you have a kind of like personality identity. It was on Facebook, now it's on TikTok and Instagram, and you are your own celebrity. And so that you are the product, and that sort of narcissistic identity is what you sell to the world, never mind just for a job. I kind of, you know, I am probably, you know, a bit of that world where, you know, if one could be an artist, isn't that brilliant? But it's what next, isn't it? It's what's next. It's all those steps of perseverance, of the not giving up, of learning all those resilience skills, of dealing with failure, of which, you know, this is, to me, like, it is like one great big failure. But I've had many, many failures. So it's another type, and it's, you know, it's off this time. And that really is interesting. I mean, I honestly, you're right. I did lose a lousy board. I lost lousy management. I wasn't going to be able to do what I wanted to do. But I also do feel like sort of, where else would I be but in the center of this zeitgeist? Because I would be dreading sitting on the wings, I'd bite my fingers off not being able to speak right now. So funny enough, and the last point was just some of those artists that have disappeared or left the country. Some of them were making the most groundbreaking work in the UK through the 90s and 2000s. I can't name names, but I do worry that there was a sort of targeted element about this, that those of us that were it's like a bit like I always think with Kathleen Stock. She's the most woke of that's saying no, and so she's attacked the most. And there's some of us in the arts that we were 2 minutes ago, we were cool, and now we're the most shunned. There's something quite odd about that going on. It's almost like we can't let these people speak because they might be right.
Yeah, very interesting. Right, that was fantastic. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Rosie. I think you need to ask your man why he hasn't got Trumbull. You know, and I mention this partly again because when you watch films like that, you realize that the people who had it hard now in retrospect are the people who look like heroes. You know, these people who were cancelled, blacklisted, who wouldn't grass on their mates, all these people. And the ones who, I think it was Edward G. Robinson, anyway, he's a famous actor in this film who basically squeals in front of the committee to McCarthy. And now we look back at him and think, what a scumbag. Whereas the people who, you know, ended up, he was put in prison for a year, Trumbull, and all these other guys who had it tough. History now looks back at them and we think these people are heroes. And, you know, I think hopefully in 10, 15, 20 years time, people like yourself will be looked at and say, well, you know, it was individuals like this that was strong. And, you know, it's great. And I think there's hopefully we can do something similar in Scotland, and Katie will hopefully have by the end of August, have a members and parents supporters group set up across Scotland for people to be able to, parents, grandparents, and people like that who are concerned about what's happening in the schools, and try and build something collectively so that, you know, people don't have to just stand by themselves. So thank you again. People can't applaud, but in the reactions button, you can do those little yellow hands. Oh, you could do that. Yes, like that. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, stay in touch. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.